Joining our 19th Sochology Eduseries session. We're excited to be joined by a very special guest today who will be talking about how to innovate smarter and avoid product diseases through radical product thinking. My name is Mudassir Bungish, and I'll be your host for today's session. Before we get started, just some quick announcements and housekeeping. First off, a big thank you to all of you who turned up for each of our city Soch cafes, Lahore, Karachi, Islamabad. We had over 100 people across Soch cafes who brought their awesome set of experiences and insights and contributed to those amazing discussions. It was also a fantastic networking opportunity, and we're absolutely thrilled to be able to provide a venue where you can all connect, exchange ideas, and put those to practice. Now, whether you're joining us from LinkedIn or YouTube, please post your questions into the chat and we'll bring them up either during or towards the end of the session. So welcome, Radhika, and thank you so much for joining us for this session. So just a bit of an intro about Radhika. Radhika is the author of Radical Product Thinking, the New Mindset for Innovating Smarter, which has been translated into several languages, including Chinese and Japanese, and has rave reviews. So if you haven't already done so, go to Amazon, get your copy, or you can head on over to her website, radicalproduct.com, to pick up a copy where she provides courses, free toolkits, and a lot more. She's an entrepreneur, a product leader who has participated in 5 acquisitions, 2 of which were companies that she founded. Radhika has built products in a wide range of industries, including broadcast, media, and entertainment, telecom, government, consumer apps, robotics, and even wine. She advises organizations from high-tech startups to government agencies on building radical products that create a fundamental change, and is currently advisor on product thinking to the Monetary Authority of Singapore. Today, her topic is radical product thinking to innovate smarter and avoid product diseases. Radhika, it's a pleasure to have you. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. I'm so excited to be here. So let's talk about this new mindset for innovating smarter. And true to the name radical, we are going to be challenging some conventional wisdom here. So let's get started with the first. And I want to start with a question. I want to give you, 10 seconds. Think about a visionary who comes to your mind, a visionary who has had an impact in this world. And feel free to share that in chat, right? Just the first name that comes to mind. And I'll give you 10 seconds to think about it. Okay, so if you've thought about it, here we go. Generally, when I ask this question, these are the kinds of names that come up, right? It's these names that keep coming up over and over. It's usually, by the way, white males usually, and very rarely some women, right? But here's the problem with it. More than anything, if you look at the pattern of who we consider a visionary, we see that a visionary is someone who is heroic, right? And that's the model of a visionary that we've had in mind for a while. That's what society has taught us, that we need to challenge. Why? Because if there are only a few people who create change in the world, then this is the rate at which we create change, right? It's this very small trickle. And so the question then we can ask ourselves is, what if each of us could create change, the kind of change that we want to bring to the world? This is the kind of change, the pace at which we could create change if each of us could help do that systematically. So what gets in the way? The problem has been that until now, a lot of the methodologies that we've learned, business books, etc., they've taught us, that building and scaling companies is all about iteration. It's about speed, using trial and error. Just try things and see what works, right? We've learned these mantras about building products: build, test, learn, scale, fail fast, learn fast, iterate quickly. This is really the crux of what we've learned is the best way to build products. This last part about iterate quickly, especially being the main mantra. But when we step back for a moment, what we realize is, methodologies such as lean and agile that really help us iterate quickly, they're the equivalent of giving us a fast car. And, having a fast car, yes, it's important. It's wonderful. Like, this is not to criticize having a McLaren or a Ferrari. By all means, that is good. It helps you get to where you want to go faster, but it doesn't tell you where you need to go. And on top of that, you can say, well, we can just ask customers, we can get customer feedback to know where to go. But what you realize is customer feedback is like sitting in your fast car and stopping to ask for directions along the way. You can stop and check if you're heading in the right way, but the reality is, before you get into your fast car and start driving, or before you stop and ask for directions, you're in the driver's seat and you have to know where you want to go. You have to be able to set that vision, right? And so when we just focus on speed of iteration, speed by itself can look like this, where we're all moving fast, but in different directions. So it can look like chaos. And the way it manifests itself is in these product diseases. And these product diseases are so common and easy to catch. My background is that I've worked in small companies and large, and regardless of industry type, I found that these same product diseases exist. And so let's do a checkup, and you're welcome to share this in chat. See if you have seen some of these diseases, right? Here's the first one, obsessive sales disorder. And this is probably my favorite disease. And the reason I say this is because I have contributed to this disease myself. Right? This disease happens when your salesperson looks at you with a glimmer in their eye and they say, if we just add this one custom feature, we can win this mega client. And that sounds mostly harmless. So we say, yes, let's do it. Right? And pretty soon by the end of the year, you have a stack of contracts and your entire roadmap is driven just by all the features that you have to make good on. So that's obsessive sales disorder. Feel free to share in chat if you've seen obsessive sales disorder. This next one is pivotitis. This happens when we keep going after, one thing after the next, just changing direction all the time. I'll give you my experience when I was heading up marketing at a startup. We started off wanting to be the next Visa of the world. And we realized, well, this is really hard because you have to acquire both customers and merchants. So we pivoted. We soon became a loyalty solutions provider for merchants. But then we said, actually, that is a really crowded market. So we said, let's forget that. We're going to move to become a credit solutions company for merchants. And as the head of marketing, at some point, we were going through just so many pivots that I didn't even know what to write on our website and what we were asking people to sign up for anymore. That's pivotitis. Again, feel free to share in chat if you've experienced pivotitis. This next disease is hypometricemia, right? And this happens when we're focusing just on a few popular metrics. And the opposite of hypometricemia is hypermetricemia, when we're just absolutely obsessed with every metric and all the analytics possible, where we're all about measure everything, test everything. But what is common across both hypometricemia and hypermetricemia is the fact that we don't think about what are the right metrics to be measuring for our product. We just become stuck and obsessed with a few metrics without considering what is right for our product. Again, feel free to share if you've experienced this. What I've found is that all of these diseases are so common because our iterations are not driven by this clarity of vision and strategy that we really need. And what we need is not just speed. Speed can look like chaos, as I mentioned. And if we remember from, our high school physics, right, what we need is speed plus direction. That's where we get forward velocity. When we can get all of these arrows, meaning all the people in our organization, pointing in the same direction. So we need to give everyone a clear direction for our speed. And this is where radical product thinking comes in. So radical product thinking is a methodology that's now being applied across the world, all the way from startups to government agencies. It's a methodology that helps us build these world-changing products in a very systematic, step-by-step manner. And in the radical product thinking way, instead of just iterating and let's just try things and see what works, we actually work on engineering the change we want to bring about by starting with a very clear vision for what's the end state we want to create, then translating that into a strategy, then into priorities, into hypothesis-driven execution and measurement, and then applying all of these ideas to engineer the culture we want. And most importantly, all of these ideas are part of a toolkit in radical product thinking that helps you communicate your rationale so that you can really bring everyone with you on the journey in your organization. Now, let's start with the idea of vision, because, all of these words like vision, strategy, etc., you've heard these before. And so at this point, you can rightfully say, I haven't heard what is radical about this, because of course, I know we have to have a vision, right? And so what I mean by a vision is very different from how we have thought about what a good vision is. And in fact, we need to unlearn so much of the myth around what makes someone a visionary and what makes a good vision, because so much of that is just so flawed in what we've been taught. Here's an example of what we have been taught. This is the kind of vision we are told we should have: contributing to human progress by empowering people to express themselves. Right? This is the kind of vision we've heard is a good vision. Here's the problem with it, though, right? When I have a vision like this, pretty much anything goes, because this vision can describe a company that is making Post-it notes, to a company that's making stickers that I can put on my backpack, to a company that is a dance studio, because that's empowering people to express themselves. This could even be the vision statement of my kid's piano teacher, because she is empowering them to express themselves, and that is contributing to human progress, right? Pretty much anything goes under this vision. And that's the problem with it. This vision is useless when you look at, this sort of a broad, fluffy vision statement that is high level. What we need instead is a detailed vision, not a tagline, a detailed vision that answers the who, what, why, when, and how. Meaning, whose world are you changing? It's not everyone's. What does their world look like today? Meaning, what exactly is the problem, and how are they solving it? Then you can ask the question, why? Why does that world need changing? Why is the status quo not acceptable? And unless we can answer that, really, we have no business building that product. Then we can ask the question, when will you know that you've arrived? Meaning, when will you know that you've accomplished what you set out to? And then finally, the how. This is finally where you can talk about your product and say, okay, how are you going to change it for them? Even when you know that you have to answer the who, what, why, when, and how, it turns out that if you start with a blank sheet of paper, it's really hard. So here is a radical vision worksheet that helps you focus not on the wording, but rather on answering these hard questions. And this way, you have a fill-in-the-blank statement, so you're not tied to the words. I'll show you in a minute how to use this vision statement, right? And I'll do that with an example. I want to share with you, how all of these elements of radical product thinking come together. And this is particularly an example that really challenges our thinking in terms of who is a visionary. And so let's look at kind of this group of visionaries and how they use these ideas to build a radical product. And the example that I want to use is an organization that makes papads. So, of course, everyone in Pakistan knows papads and what they are, but like for others on LinkedIn, papadams are, of course, these lentil crackers we have in Indian restaurants. And so, here, one thing that people don't know usually is there's one organization that has a majority market share in papads, and that's, Lijat. They have over 60% market share, and the rest of the market is hugely fragmented. They have over 220 million in annual revenues. And what's most interesting of all is that this organization is owned by 45,000 women who are all equal partners. So how did this come about? So in 1959, Lijat was started by 7 women, and they wanted to earn a dignified living. They didn't want to be dependent on their husbands for an income, and they wanted to be able to contribute to household income so that they could educate their kids. The problem was, though, that they felt like their only skill that they had was cooking. They didn't have an education, so their job prospects were slim. So these women decided to get together and make papads, which, as you know, of course, are very hard to make. And so they decided to get together, make these papads, sell them, and whatever they got, profits or losses, they decided they would split them equally amongst themselves. So that was how Lijat started. So these 7 women started rolling papads on the terrace of their building. And soon these 7 women became 25. And in the course of a year, they became 300 women. And they no longer fit on the building's terrace. Today, decades later, of course, they don't fit on any building, but Lijat instead has these buses that drives these member sisters from these pickup points to centers. So they pick up the dough. These member sisters go back home and they roll these papads at home. The next day, they come back, they drop off what they rolled, and they get paid for what they rolled. They pick up the new dough, and the cycle starts over. If you think about Lijat and how it started, their product was a mechanism for creating change. So they had a change that they envisioned, and that was this financial independence for women by allowing them to earn a dignified living. And their product was the papads that taste like they're homemade, but without requiring the effort. So this product was only a mechanism for creating the change that they envisioned in the world. And that's one of the first philosophies of radical product thinking. So once you think of your product as this, mechanism for change, you can then write a vision statement. So here's what Lijat's vision statement sounds like. And I wrote up their vision in this format after interviewing the president of Lijat, Swati Paradkar.
Oh, that's cool.
And so here's how the vision reads. Today, when women without education from poor households want to run the household and educate their kids, they have to depend on their husband's income and they can't influence household spending. This is unacceptable because it limits their children's educational prospects and it repeats the cycle of poverty. We envision a world where women become self-reliant, leading to their socioeconomic progress. We're bringing about this world through high-quality papadums and later other fast-moving consumer goods without ever taking charity. So this was their clear vision that they had. But of course, a vision is only the first step, right? So next you need a strategy. So the radical product thinking approach has this mnemonic, radical, RDCL, which helps you create a comprehensive strategy. The R stands for real pain points, which means you have to ask, what makes someone come to your product? In this case, for these women, what do they need for a dignified living? In this case, they had, they had this work ethic, but they didn't have much in terms of education. The second thing was they were primary caregivers in a patriarchy. They couldn't leave home for very long. And so the design or the solution meant that these women, they could not work from factories. They had to work from home. And if they wanted to influence daily spending, they needed to earn daily wages. And therefore, the design was that they got paid every day for what they rolled. In terms of capabilities, this is asking, what is the underlying engine that allows the solution to exist? And so to be able to pay them every day, pay needed to be transparent. They needed to build this mindset where we're all going to share equally in profits. Can you imagine 45,000 lawyers, for example, sharing profits equally? Like, it just sounds impossible. So they had to cultivate this mindset. And then the last thing in terms of logistics, this is where you ask, how do we deliver the solution? This is where you think about your business model, how you train people, etc. One of the key things about Lijat was their business model where no credit is ever given or taken so that, in fact, they can pay women every day. They also have decentralized quality control, really getting people to think about what quality means. Right? So this is a radical strategy that is truly comprehensive. And so how does this translate into priorities? Well, priorities means thinking about the long term versus short term. Of course, we can't ignore the short term in thinking about vision and strategy, right? And so how do you make this clear for your team? What are the trade-offs that you're making? So draw up these trade-offs explicitly for your team with an X and Y axis. Is this a good vision fit? And is this good for survival? Things that are good for both vision and survival, of course, those are the easy decisions. That's ideal. But if you only ever focus on that, you're never investing in the vision. Sometimes you need to take the time to invest in the vision, right? Like refactor code or run user research. And the opposite of that is when you build vision debt, when you do things that are good for survival, but not good for the vision. The example of obsessive sales disorder, when you keep doing things that help you win deals, for example, but it's not good for the vision, that's incurring lots and lots of vision debt, and that becomes obsessive sales disorder. So let's think about, what did Lidget do? They started with taking on some vision debt, actually. They had to take a loan. It wasn't good for the vision, but they had to survive. But then they invested in the vision. They decided they would share in profits or losses equally. That was an investment in the vision. In terms of ideal features, that was paying wages every day, not giving or taking credit. These were good for both the vision and survival. But then over time, they invested in the vision by investing in women's education, giving them financial literacy. And then finally, a hypothesis-driven execution and measurement approach. If you think about how we measure success, you could measure popular metrics like revenues, market share, customer reviews. This is not to say that they're not important, but there's one metric by which Lidget measures whether they are making progress towards their vision. And that metric is derived from their vision and their strategy. And that metric is about how many women is Lidget creating financial independence for. So think about, how would you derive metrics from your vision and strategy to prove whether your vision and strategy is actually working? So finally, the idea is that radical product thinking is your constantly improvable mechanism for engineering change. And so Lidget was a radical product that gave independence to 45,000 women by engineering change systematically. Right? And so here I've described, how founders can do it, but you might be wondering, but wait, that's still a matter of, a few founders and leaders. How can each of us be visionaries? And for this, I want to share with you an example that is so meaningful to me, because it shows you that you can apply these ideas absolutely anywhere, and anything can be your product, including even activism, right? And the example I want to share with you is that of Claudette Colvin. Now, history has all but forgotten Claudette Colvin, but she's an important figure in the civil rights movement in the US. So Claudette Colvin was one of the first few people who refused to give up her seat when she was asked to, when there was segregation on buses, and she lived in Montgomery, Alabama, and she refused to give up her seat. And so, she was only 15 at the time, and she was arrested for that. And so when I interviewed Claudette Colvin, I asked her, but you weren't even an adult. How did you take this action? And Claudette talked about the vision that she had. She said, I wanted a world where we all had the same American dream, where we could all live that same American dream as white people. And I was tired of complaining. I was tired of hearing adults complain, but not do anything about it, right? And so how did she translate this vision into her priorities? Well, she started by investing in the vision. She didn't give up her seat when the bus driver asked her to. But she said that that was a spontaneous reaction from herself. What truly showed an investment, right, was over time how she didn't let that go. So, there was a Supreme Court case of Broder versus Gale where she was one of the key plaintiffs, and there was so much pressure to not participate in this. But her fiery testimony helped overturn that law and was a major landmark for the civil rights movement. And so that was truly investing in the vision. And to me, this was one of my biggest achievements, to see Claudette Colvin holding the Radical Product Thinking book in 2021. So with that, what I want to share with you is that you can systematically engineer change by starting with clarity of vision, translating into a strategy, then priorities, then hypotheses for execution and measurement, and then lastly into culture. And you can bring your whole team with you. And by doing that, you can build vision-driven products and create the change you want to bring. So if you want to learn more, you can get the Radical Product Thinking book. It's on Amazon and in bookstores around you. You can also ask me about workshops and training. you can get the free toolkit from radicalproduct.com. And finally, you're welcome to message me on LinkedIn. I always love to hear how people are creating change in the world. So please feel free to reach out. And with that, I would love to take your questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Radhika. That was an amazing session. And I think, the example you gave of Nigat, that is a radical example, right? Just a completely different way of thinking. It's hard to imagine things without credit. It's hard to get paid every single day, right? You think of any job in this day and age, right? They try to kind of delay that so you'll get paid biweekly or maybe towards the end of the month, right? But just really kind of going against the grain and thinking radically, right, led to that. One other kind of thought that I had was, they had a long-term vision, right, of what they wanted to achieve. So they weren't really focused on kind of the short-term outcomes. They were thinking about long-term outcomes. You put all those things within the vision template. So I'm curious what your take is on startups today, right? Everybody just focused on hyper growth. They want to achieve growth at all costs. How do you sell something like this, to any organization?
Yeah, great question. And you're exactly right. Like we think as a startup that we can just focus on growth and do whatever it takes to grow and not focus on the vision. Like we think we can figure out the vision along the way. But the reality is, right, you have 2 to 3 pivots before you run out of money or momentum. And it doesn't matter how much money you have as a startup, but that reality is you still have 2 to 3 pivots. And I speak from my own experience, but also because here's what happens. Even when you have all the money, at some point, your team loses faith that you know what you're doing if you keep pivoting. And it's exhausting as a team. Like you're really not being efficient.
Absolutely.
And so start with this stake in the ground in terms of a vision. What's the problem you're setting out to solve? Answering this, who, what, when, and how, right? When you answer those questions, if you discover that you need to pivot, then you can do so. But it helps you use your pivots like silver bullets instead of just, oh, we'll just try and we'll keep pivoting. It really helps you narrow down the number of pivots that you take on.
Right. Awesome. So we have a question from the live stream. So driving change in old and big organizations is hard. What's the best way to change the old ways while keeping everyone on board? So kind of
And this
opposite of
is
what I
so
asked.
true. So true, right? Exactly. The biggest challenge when you're transforming an organization is how do you get everyone on board? So one of the things that I've found necessary is you have to start with what is the problem? Even the idea of this vision statement, you can apply that to transformation. Why should anybody in this organization transform? Why should they change? Because change is hard. And so start with this question of what is the problem we're trying to solve? Maybe you're seeing product diseases in the organization that are getting in the way of innovation. So very often, even starting with that problem statement and being able to talk openly about product diseases really helps create that buy-in for why do we need to change. Then once you create that buy-in for why do we need to change, then you can introduce these ideas of radical product thinking, like here are things that we can do to do better. And so one other thing I'll mention is, especially in hierarchical organizations, where it's hard to speak up about product diseases, and I think this is especially true in Asia, one of the techniques that you can use is, share articles about product diseases, and you'll find some on radical product thinking, but you can also use the radical product thinking book for a book club, for example. And so in the book club discussion, talk about the product diseases that you're observing in the organization. And that helps create this impetus for change.
Right. So one other question I had was around I hope I get this right, hypermetricemia.
Yeah, hypermetricemia. Go on.
Yeah. So, there is a trend now of data-driven product management, right? Again, what you're proposing is really radical. I'm curious, can you maybe give some examples where, metrics are important, but they aren't everything, in your experience that has led to some kind of good product decisions?
Yeah. And, one example I'll give is what happens when we haven't thought through what metrics we should be measuring is we tend to measure everything. And I'll give you the example of the startup. So there was a startup. They wanted to spread kindness in the world, and they wanted to do that by getting people to buy someone a coffee. And so they created this app where you can buy someone a coffee using this app as a way of saying thank you or pay it forward in advance, right?
Sure.
Um, so all the numbers on this app were looking fantastic. They had organic growth. They had a huge number of daily active users. They had huge amounts of time spent on site. So all of these popular metrics were looking fantastic. But there was one metric that looked terrible, which was how many people were spending their own money to buy someone a coffee? Zero. Like nobody was doing that. So what were all these people doing on the site? They were going to the site to find free coffee. So, so right, this is the problem. When we are not measuring what matters, that's derived from our vision and strategy, then we're measuring lots of things that are not relevant. And what happens as a product manager is that you are the poor soul who's stuck with analyzing all this data, and often it's not telling you what is most important. And so, what did we do instead? We changed so much about the product. We said, okay, the main thing is not about finding free coffees. The way it's going to work is we'll create this feature where each person gets two coffees, one that you get to consume, the second that you must gift to someone else.
Mhm.
And so we were teaching people how to actually gift coffees. And then as a result, 27% of people started gifting coffee with their own money to someone, right? And like that is how you measure whether people are creating change. But all of that has to be derived from your vision and strategy.
Gotcha. Okay, we have another question from YouTube. It is, I think, quite a broad question. So, hi, Radhika. Considering the rapid pace of technological advancement and changing consumer preferences, how can product managers effectively balance innovation in a diverse user base?
Interesting. I could go a few different directions from here. There's the diverse user base part and changing consumer preferences. So I'll say two things about that. One is when you craft your vision, you have to assume that things are changing because the market is changing. There are technological advancements, consumer preferences change. What we've learned about a vision is that your vision never changes. And that's one of the key things we have to really just challenge. Think about your vision. If you're a startup, maybe you're discovering things about all of what you just said, consumer preferences, advancements, changing markets, or what the market need is. You might be discovering that every month. So come back every month and think about your vision. Is this still valid? Are the answers to the who, what, why, when, and how, do they still make sense? Even if you're not an early stage startup, like every 6 months as a product manager, you should look at these questions. And even if you have a mature product, every year at least, do think about these questions. It's worth your time. And also, you'll have changes in your team. So it's good to align as a team on all of this. Then there's the second part of the question, which talks about, you might have a diverse user base. About that, one thing I'll say is we need diversity on our team to be able to address a diverse user base. Here's why. Even when we do user research, typically when we look at users' answers, what we perceive is through the lens of our own experience. So,
Absolutely.
when we try to address a user segment, we're always thinking about needs from our own experiences. And it's very hard to identify with needs of maybe marginalized communities unless you have people on your team that have had some experiences in life where those experiences might resonate for people and they see it with a different lens, right? And so that part about addressing a diverse user base, if we want to create a world that works for all, we need diversity on our teams. And as a product manager, we should be thinking about how do we create that diversity on our teams.
Awesome. Thank you for that answer. Yeah, and specifically on the vision piece, right? Like we've typically been told vision has to be maximum of like, 2 sentences long, and it's something you don't want to change for like the next 20, 30 years. So, but it makes sense, right? If things are changing so rapidly, do you want to continue kind of sinking that hole? If you've dug a hole, you want to continue, instead of iterating on that, right? Iterating on your vision. So,
Just to touch on what you said there, because what you said, that your vision has to be 1 or 2 lines, you're exactly right. That's one of those, pieces of conventional wisdom that we've really grown up with, right? Like, there's often this confusion between a vision versus a tagline. You'll notice that legit vision statement that I described, right? It sounds more like an essay than
absolutely.
this sort of a description that's 1 or 2
Right.
sentences long, right? And what I noticed when I was talking to legit women, the member sisters, nobody has a tagline that they've memorized. Everyone, if you ask them about the vision, they will describe it in their own words. And it was all of these descriptions that I listened to that I was able to translate into this radical vision statement, right? But nobody gave me a tagline. So what is more important is getting everyone to absorb and internalize this vision as opposed to repeating back this tagline you've created.
Absolutely. Awesome. So, as they say about most diseases, prevention is better than cure. So hopefully you aren't all chronically suffering from some of these product diseases yet. And if you are, now you know what to do about them. Radhika, that was really an eye-opening session. So on behalf of our product community and the Product Soch team, thank you so much. And thank you to all of you for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. This was so much fun.